Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join with us for what is a little bit of Aramaic or Syriac today from the Peshitta Syriac text. And a verse that I wanted to dive into is in a very challenging portion of Scripture in Acts chapter 5. And it is the encounter with a couple called Ananias and Sapphira. The church was in its infancy. People were in a spirit of giving and camaraderie and unity, and they were selling their possessions and giving to the greater good for the supporting of those who were in the ministry and reaching out. It was just a beautiful time of fellowship. And then Ananias and Sapphira enter the picture. And of course, there's a moral to the story of, of being deceitful and stealing and so forth. But um, it has always been a strange story because the penalty for Ananias and Sapphira's um, deed was that they both died. Now, we assume that they were um, in a right relationship with God up to this point, that they had been filled with the Spirit of God. Um, it doesn't say explicitly, but there was something that moved them to give. And so there's some unknowns here. They may not have been a part of what we identify as the church now, but may have been caught up in some level of fellowship and wanting to be a part of it, but not really being what they should be. Obviously, that's plays into this. But when we go to verse 3, there was just a word that jumped out to me that I wanted to investigate in the Syriac to see if it would shed any light on, why they did, maybe not why they did what they did, but the seriousness of what they did that caused God to punish them so severely that it, obviously took them out of the picture. Their lives were taken, and it was a punishment. And again, this is not something you hear about talked about in Christianity, where we believe God is loving and forgiving, and that there's no sin that cannot be forgiven. There's no deed that cannot be forgiven. So when we take that as being basically the core of what Christianity is, then you insert this story, it makes us think. Obviously, there are punishments that occur, um, even in New Testament times. So, what was it about Ananias and Sapphira that caused God to react in such a way? So, let's take a look at verse 3. Here you see the Estrangelus script on the top with the Ashuri script, square script of the Hebrew ish underneath. And so as we read through, what we want to look at is this word that is spelled uh, Dalet, Tav, Dalet, Gimel, Lamed. And so we're going to look at that and unpack that word because that's the word that is translated as a lie. And so the word itself here, if you look at how it's written, it's the heart um, to lie, and then in the spirit of holiness. That's what I like about the Peshitta Aramaic, is that the understanding of God's spirit is it's called the spirit of holiness. And I believe it's that way on purpose so that we can understand that the purpose of God's Spirit in this case is for bringing us into a better relationship, a right relationship with Him, that we would become holy like He is holy. So, with that, let's go to our Analyze button, unpack this, this verse. And of course, we see the translations of Etheridge, Murdoch, Lamsa, King James. All of them have lie, L-I-E, L-I-E, L-I-E. So as we scroll down, the somewhat wooden translation of this is Phil adversaries, which is Satan means adversary, heart to lie falsely, spirit holiness. So that's basically what the Aramaic says, and the English smooths it out so that it makes sense to us. But looking at this word to colon 4174, which is the verb to lie false, lie or be false, we see that it is in a second person masculine singular. But what's interesting, it's in an imperfect conjugation, which means it's not a completed action. And it's also in a pa-el form, which is an intensive form. Um, and so that's what piqued my interest. So we're going to take a look at what this truly means in a little bit of grammar here in Syriac. The imperfect tense primarily denotes an incomplete, ongoing, or future actions. Well, he has already completed this. So we think, he has done the deed. Why isn't it, why is it not in a completed action, a perfect tense? Why is it in an imperfect tense? Maybe there is more behind it than just what he did, that the purpose that he was, the understanding by this imperfect tense is that his intentions were not yet completed. This wasn't just um, the action of giving part of the money. There was more behind it, something that hadn't been yet fulfilled. And this is where it starts to become interesting in that uh, so the Lord intervening by taking their life was not so much a result of what they had done in giving this money inappropriately or lying about how much money they gave. It was what they were building upon yet to do, which has not yet been accomplished. The other thing that's interesting too is the formation of the imperfect with this stem, this ending, is that you'll notice in the word itself, it had a tav um, prefix on it, which is the indication of the imperfect. But in Syriac, it was interesting that this tav imperfect is the same for a second person masculine singular and the same for a third person feminine singular. And that kind of comes into play when we look at who's involved here. We have Ananias, who Peter is speaking to. So this he would have been saying you, which would have been the second person masculine singular. But we also have another player that comes into the picture later who's not there, and that's his wife, who would have been third person feminine singular or she. So you have a you and you have a she encompassed in the same word. And I thought that was maybe it's coincidence. I thought it was very interesting the way that was brought out. So with this, we're going to continue to unpack this word and open it up here, expand it. And what we want to look at is, of course, lying and falsehoods and things you would think show up so often in the Bible that there'd be numerous verses that we could look at to try to gain an insight as the context was used under. Well, in this word, this is the only place in the whole Bible that this word is used in Aramaic scriptures. So, which again piques our interest as to what was going on here. So we don't get much from the basic translations from the English translators because the idea has been formed. Yes, lying is there, but as we see, this is in an imperfect state. It's in a pa-el form, which is equivalent to the pl in Hebrew. So it's a very intensive, the most intensive way this word could be used. So Peter is charging him, saying, what you're doing is so strong, so intense, and that's why he's being confronted in this way. So we open up Marcus Jastro's and we see if there's anything in the Hebrew sages' writing of the Targumim that uses this word. What we find is that it is here in the Targumim, but its translation is to outgeneral or to play tricks. I was struck when I saw that, and I had to think about what does it mean to outgeneral. I go down here, and the second form of this verb means to divide the troops. And so suddenly this began to make sense to me that perhaps Ananias and Sapphira had some conquering or outgeneraling, or they were looking to divide the troops, divide the church, that their main purpose had not yet been fulfilled, that that was just one step in what they were trying to do in perhaps over overthrow or outgeneral Peter's authority, outgeneral what obviously they found out was God's authority, and to divide the troops and cause division, to cause disruption, to set themselves up as someone who should be in leadership position. You know, I'm playing into this or reading into this, but what the term outgeneral or play tricks with them or divide the troops could mean. I also find it interesting if you go up a little bit that this is also the letters are used in the term for the name of a Philistine god, Dagon, a type of idolatry. And again, what we know in at least the Hebrew is that the root words in the lexicons um, have meanings and cross over together, that they come from a root that creates a meaning in all of these words, very unlike English, of course. So when we see this, you know, there could be some ancient undertones as to where this word came from and its relationship to paganism, idolatry, the Philistine god of Dagon, who's and whatever he embodied, whatever his type of idolatry had for a core, for a root of, was it outgeneraling? We think of that in what just comes to mind now, the story where the Philistines captured the ark and they took the ark into the um, temple of their god Dagon, which was supposedly in the shape of a fish. And in the morning, as the story goes, Dagon had fallen to the ground in obeisance to the Ark of the Covenant that was there. And so, you know, that Philistines thought that their god Dagon had outgeneraled the one true God of the Bible, represented by the Ark of the Covenant. But in the morning, they found quite the opposite. So um, I don't know. There's very interesting thoughts that go with this. I hope that this has been an inspiration to you. I hope that through this you can see that there's so much, such richness to the words in the original languages, and just a treasure chest that we can explore to help. It changed my idea of the story of Ananias and Sapphira, and what their ultimate goal was as it was revealed in the Syriac language. So God bless you all. Have a great weekend, and hope to see you next time. Bye bye.